So this is session number 4 of the Swiss NLP crash course. Thank you for participating. So today's speaker is Mascha Kurpicz-Briki. She's a professor joining us from Berner Fachhochschule, FBH. And Mascha is working on applied natural language processing. She is using machine learning for use cases that have social and societal impact. And this includes the research project that she is presenting today, which is all about bias in NLP. So before we start, let me briefly share with you my slide about the Swiss NLP days. So I'm sharing this in a tab of this Zoom meeting. So the Swiss NLP days, it's a 3-day event that is planned by the Swiss NLP Association and ZHAW. And the crash courses, including the one that we're doing today, is a series of events that leading up to this event. So during the Swiss NLP days in May, we will have an exposition that's more business oriented. We'll also have a scientific conference, Swiss Text. So if you think this could be relevant for your company or your research institution, please check it out. All right, so without further ado, Mascha, the floor is yours. We will have a 30 minutes talk planned, and then there will be plenty of time to ask questions to Mascha.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to talk about well, my work in the field of bias in NLP, and especially the bias project. So the bias project is a Horizon Europe project where I'm currently leading the technical work package, and we will get back to it and its content after. So let me just say a few words about myself. Thanks a lot already for the kind introduction. So most things were already said. So I'm a researcher and co-leading the Applied Machine Intelligence Research Group and the BFH Generative AI Lab here in Biel. And my research interests are around natural language processing with a focus on applications from the healthcare or social sectors, and also the big topic of societal stereotypes and bias in AI, which is one of the larger risks that we are encountering with all of these kind of models that are being used. I'm also working on what we call augmented intelligence, in the sense that we are aiming at applications that support humans rather than aiming at replacing them. Because I think in many, especially in the more sensitive sectors, it's really crucial that the humans stays in the loop and takes the responsibility or reflects on decisions. So in the context of decision making, it's crucial to consider that the human perspective. So to get this started, I used ChatGPT 4o to generate an image that shows how AI is reinforcing societal stereotypes. Yeah, so we see the problem with generating written text and images, still an issue, even though I didn't even ask for particular text. From the images, yeah, mixed feelings here. I think the chain that people have around this is a little bit weird. And yes, so compared to other images I have generated, it's still quite okay, but I'm not sure this is what we're looking for. But we will see what is behind this problem of societal stereotypes in NLP. I first want to say a few words about machine learning itself. For those of you, there might be some people in the audience that are not familiar with these large language model with machine learning. So I will give a short introduction on that. So typically what we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence is that we refer to methods from machine learning. Machine learning meaning that the computer is learning by examples that are provided in the training data. This is different from what I call here traditional software. So for traditional software, we have a specific input. We then have a specific set of instructions that is executed, and at the end, we have a specific result. So very similar to a cooking or a cake recipe. So now if somebody else goes there and uses the same ingredients in the same quantity, executes exactly the same instructions, putting the oven, same temperature, same duration, and so on, we would hopefully get the same cake. So this is what the expected result of this kind of software. Whereas in machine learning, it's a bit the other way around. So based on this training data, a model is generated that is then able to classify other data. So if we want to put it that way, the rules are automatically deducted. So this comes with a lot of potential. There are a lot of applications that are possible thanks to this. So it can be decision-making, classification, generation in the sense of NLP. However, it also comes with some caveats that we have to pay attention to that are different compared to this traditional software. If we look at a concrete example of supervised machine learning, we can train together a system that differentiates between cat and dog images. So here we would provide as the training data a large sample of cat pictures and dog pictures. And I said supervised machine learning because in this kind of machine learning, we would need an additional information associated with each of these images that tells us whether we have a cat or a dog on the specific picture. So now here we have 4 pictures, but typically we talk about 100,000 or even more training samples that we would need for something like in this example. So this training data is then used to create this model that is then able for a new and unseen picture, so a picture that was not present in the training data, to make a prediction whether we see a cat or a dog on that picture. Now here we are at one of the very crucial points of this technology. The system makes a prediction. So even a really, really good system might be wrong in 1 or 2 or 5% of the cases. So this is an important constraint that is very relevant for the choice of our use case when we are using this technology. Can we live with this 1 or 2 or 5% of error that might happen? Now, how good that works and how good that works for different cats or dogs depends also on the data that we had available in the training data, how balanced it was, how diverse it was. This use case here uses examples of images. But the same principle of this supervised classification that we have seen here can be applied also to other different kinds of documents. We could think, for example, of a use case of sorting documents, where we have letters and bills that come in different formats. And we're using a similar approach to train a system that is able to automatically differentiate and maybe move them to specific folders. So here it's very beneficial if we have 10,000 documents that we don't have to sort them manually, but we have this kind of model that helps us to put bills on one side and letters on the other side. And this is probably one of the use cases where it's still beneficial that we are able to classify them correctly in 99% of the cases, and once in a while find something that is in the wrong folder, as compared to other like hiring decisions or medical, where it's really hard to live or to potentially live or handle this 1% of error. So what we have seen in these 2 examples is a classification problem, where we are classifying images or documents or whatever other data type into 2 or more different classes. Machine learning, however, is much more than that. So there's a whole range of different machine learning tasks where we can benefit from this technology implemented in different ways. So what we saw, the prediction of categories, the classification, is what we will see on the upper right here. On the other side, we have the possibility to do clustering, so to identify, for example, groups, which can be useful when we don't have the explicit labels that we need for the example we have seen before. Another very common use case is to detect uncommon patterns, so some anomaly detection on data that can be used for very different application use cases from different domains. We can make predictions from sequential data. So the classical example of we have historical data and we want to outlook or make predictions, for example, for the future. And we, of course, have the field of text processing and text generation, so natural language processing that can also benefit, of course, from the machine learning technology. So here I want to make the link to what we have seen in the example of this supervised machine learning classification for images on how this relates to the language models. So similarly to what we have seen, we have training data and we have a language model that is being trained based on this training data. And the training data for these kind of systems are plain text, so large amount of text. This is because here we are not in a classification problem where we have two categories that we can label explicitly and we can differentiate. So what happens here is that our labels are more implicit. Implicit in the sense that we are having text, and there are different ways on how this model can be trained, but a common way is that parts of the sentence or single words are masked. So they are hidden so that the system has to predict the missing word, meaning that we have an implicit label that we are going to predict and can train the system on that. And these large amounts of training data, they have to be collected, and it's one of the major bottlenecks why it's so hard apart the resources to train such a model is to get sufficient amount of data. And this also brings the fact that it's very hard to control the correctness of the information contained in this training data, or whether there are unwanted relations. So the idea of this model that results from this training process is that, said simplified, it's able just to predict the next word in a sentence. Now, the sentence can be a partial sentence as we see it here. It can be a history of question and answers in a question answering system, or can have different formats. So the intuition behind that is that if we have a sentence like Anna went to the forest and saw A, and then we are looking for the next word, that tree would have a quite high probability. It would probably be a good fit for the sentence as the next word. Whereas lion could be theoretically possible. It fits also the sentence structure, but would, at least around here, be a bit less likely. Whereas another word like smile that has already, does not fit the grammatical structure of the sentence would be very unlikely. So the training, as said before, happens on these large amounts of text. So from this training data, the large amount of text, a language model is trained. And the intuition behind this is that we want to learn how words and sentences in the training data relate to each other. So as said, one way of doing this is training the system by predicting missing words, or for example, predicting the next word in the sentence. So the task that as we have seen before is also what is happening then. Now, the challenge we have is to get this large amount of text, and especially that this large amount of text was produced by our society. So there are a lot of relations that are very useful to be in there. So that's why it actually works. However, there's also the risk that we cover relations between words that are in the training data of our society, but we do not necessarily want them to be reflected in applications or in generated texts. But we will get back to that. So first of all, I just want to say a few words about these pre-trained language models. So what typically happens is that we have these language models that were trained on this large amount of text, and that can then be used either directly or through further training, so continuous training or fine-tuning procedures, to resolve different functionalities, so to have different tasks. This could, for example, be chatbots, spam detection, sentence completion, and many other NLP application use cases. So one example is that we have the GPT models and we have ChatGPT as an application relying on these GPT models. Now, the problem of bias. Bias in AI application is a topic that came up over the last years. There were different cases that made it up to production, resulting even to several media headlines. So I have 3 examples here, but there are way more than that. There are entire books written about this problem. So one typical problem is with images. So one example from BBC showed that a UK passport checker showed a bias against dark-skinned women. There was the problem of Tai, which was a chatbot that was interacting with Twitter users and learning from interactions with Twitter users, and that had to be turned off within a quite short amount of time because it became very racist and had a lot of different other very inappropriate answers. And there is the famous examples of the recruitment tool that was in a tech domain where there was a male domination in the previous records, and they used historical data to predict who is a good candidate, which of course then is highly problematic and led to a problem of bias. So I said before, the problem of bias is has a very normative component. So we first of all have to define what bias is in order to be able to address the problem. Another example where we can observe this kind of societal stereotypes or roles that are being reflected is machine translation. So when we translate from a language like English, where we have certain expressions that are gender neutral, like the expert or the nurse, and we translate it to a language that where there's more gendered, like for example German, we see that the expert can be translated as der Experte when it's male or die Expertin when it's female. And there has to be a decision because it has to be either one or the other. And what we see there is that, as in this example here, we have a very we have a reflection of typical roles that is encoded somewhere in the training data that is then reflected in this machine translation. Depending on what tools we use, some examples are fixed, some are not, but it's one of the problems where we can easily see this kind of bias. Another example I made a few days ago with ChatGPT. So I started with a prompt where I said that I will give you 2 jobs, and you tell me which job is better suited for a woman: nurse at a wildlife rehabilitation center or marine biologist. Of course, here we have some sort of safety measure being in place. The system says, yeah, that both jobs are equally suited for women or men because of career suitability shouldn't depend on gender. We say that a lot of general sentences, but expressing itself against having any bias. So does that mean the problem is solved? So to figure that out, I made it a bit more implicit. So I changed the prompt and said, I want to create a short story and need some inspiration. My characters are Julia and Ben. They're a young couple, they're freshly married, they're both working with animals. And I asked it to give me 2 sentences about each of their job activities. What happened then? So this was in a separate prompt. So we see that Julia is carefully nursing injured birds or educates visitors about conservation, whereas Ben is a marine biologist, collecting data, rehabilitates stranded marine animals. The wording that is used and the roles that are described in this profession are quite different. I made another example where both are working in healthcare instead. Here, Sylvia was a dedicated emergency room nurse, whereas John is a pediatrician. So we see that the roles are fairly different. Of course, these are 2 individual examples, but this is what we also see in research when we do more systematic investigations on this matter on the different language models. There is a tendency to reflect what was in the training data, so to reflect all of the relations and societal stereotypes and role models that are in the training data, also in the outcoming generated texts or answers here in the case of a chatbot. Another example, so this is a bit older, so I'm not sure it can be reproduced at this moment with the current version of ChatGPT, is the image generation. So image generation, again, has a high potential to reflect stereotypes, so not only for professions or gender, but also from very different aspects. So in this example here, I had asked to generate 4 pictures of professors in computer science. So as all of the pictures look quite similar, I wanted it to be more specific. So I specified that I want to generate 4 pictures of different professors in computer science. Well, they don't really look like me. So we see here that we have 4 different persons, but yeah, the diversity is mainly about the position they're having and maybe a bit the age. So we see that there is some potential to yeah, have some more diversity in this image generation. So how does all of this relate to the work we are doing in the BIAS project? The BIAS project, with the subtitle Mitigating Diversity Biases in the Labor Market, is looking at AI application with a particular focus of AI for recruitment and the HR sector, as well as language models for European languages. It's an interdisciplinary project where we are working with researchers and companies from the social sciences and humanities, with the legal background, to bring in all of those different perspectives. So we are looking at how AR applications are currently used on the labor market all over Europe. And especially, and this is the part we are working on, how the human biases that are that can happen when humans make decisions, stereotypes that humans might have, how they are reflected in AI applications and in particular in language models. And we work on technical methods on how the biases can be detected and, of course, eventually reduced. I'm saying here reduced because of having something like a bias-free system is really something that would be very, very challenging for different reasons. The way bias, what can be a bias is, first of all, a normative process. So something that some people might see as a bias, others might not see as a bias. So first of all, there is a definition of bias, a shared definition of bias that is required in order to start with any technical work. So it's not only a technical, but also a societal problem. On the other side, there are many different biases that can be with regard to the origin of somebody, the gender, the religion, the age, and many different aspects, as well as intersectional aspects. So there can be different stereotypes for women, men, and elderly women and elderly men, for example. So there are many, many different groups and ways how these biases can be expressed. The BIAS project also has a large part of participation. So it's possible to participate in what we call the national labs. It's a community of stakeholders with which in the first parts of the project, so we are now in the half, slightly after the half of a 4-year project. In the first half of the project, we have done a lot of co-creation activities and surveys to collect the data we are then using in the project. And now in the second half of the project, we are offering different awareness raising and capacity building activities, webinars and learnings around the topics and the findings of the project. So the technical components of the BIAS project are threefold. On one side, we have our colleagues in Norway that are working on a fair recruiting system relying on case-based reasoning. So here they're working towards an explainable approach to learn from manually curated data on how to make a support system that can help in handling a lot of cases, but at the same time having this advantage of being explainable compared to machine learning algorithms used in a classical way. We then work on the mitigation of bias in text-based recruitment application. So here it's about particularities that can result, for example, in a cover letter written by a woman or written by a man, in having different results when being used or processed in some sort of a machine learning classification or ranking system. And finally, we are working on the bias detection and mitigation in word embeddings and language model, where it's really about identifying and mitigating these societal biases within the LLMs and other language models that are being used both for direct interactions, but also for NLP applications, sometimes behind the scenes. So there are different challenges or focus points that we have in this project. So one point is that current research has a strong focus on English. However, often when transferring these results to European languages, we see that there are different particularities. So for one example are the specific linguistic properties. When methods are developed with regard to English, and then we transfer them to more gendered languages like Italian, German, or French, there are a lot of challenges that might interfere with these methods, and that makes that we cannot just easily transfer them, and we have to adapt and develop specific methodologies for these languages. So in this project, we are working with different European languages, including German, Italian, Dutch, Turkish, Icelandic, and Norwegian. So we have a wide range of very different languages that we are dealing with all of them having their linguistic particularities that are to be considered. Our work, previous work has also indicated that there are cultural differences in how bias is reflected in language models. So people in specific regions might have specific stereotypes or biases that are then reflected accordingly in the language resources for these specific languages from that regions. So this is something we have explored in these co-creation workshops that we have done all over Europe in the first half of the project, to really see what are the local biases that are there and how are they reflected in the language models. So again, here, this has an important impact on the methods we are using to detect this. And of course, it's crucial, as mentioned before, this is an interdisciplinary project because it's crucial to work in an interdisciplinary team in this kind of application context. So to summarize, as mentioned before, I think due to the different limitations of all of these technologies, ranging from hallucinations, from what we have seen today, the stereotypes, the biases, we should aim at an augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, in the sense that we are looking at tools that support humans rather than at replacing them, especially when it comes to sensitive use cases. So we should see the AI as a tool, making a responsible use of it. Responsible use here meaning that we should be aware of the limitations. We should ask ourselves that if the use case we are using it is suitable, or whether we have to embed it in processes in a different way in order to be sure to make a responsible use of it. We should check generated contents here in the case of generative AI for correctness, and always be critical, as there might be some implicit biases or stereotypes as we have seen before.